Welcome back, everyone, to another DevOps Live virtual meetup. I just want to let everyone know before we bring on our speaker that for those of you that weren't here last week or the previous week, I just want to let everyone know that DevOps Days has been moved from August of this year to August of next year, 2021, and that's our website there for DevOps Days. And also, I want to let everyone know that if you want to attend any other DevOps Days virtual conference, there's a lot of them happening nowadays. They're happening all around the world. So just go to devopsdays.org, and some of them are free, some of them are paid. So just go out there and pick a conference that you like to attend, look at the speakers, and just join in the fun. Join in and listen to some of the talks there. A lot of great talks are happening, even though we're virtual. So with that, without anything else in mind right now, I'm going to go ahead and bring on our speaker here. His name is, everybody knows him as Waldo. How you doing, Waldo?
I'm great, Mike. How are you?
Doing great. How are things going?
Oh, well, as well as can be expected given our times.
I hear you. So what I'm gonna leave you all with Waldo here. I'm gonna let him do his introduction, where he works, and then he'll proceed on to the presentation. So without further ado, thank you very much, Waldo, for making this talk happen.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to see people again. So
not a problem. Let me go ahead and bring on your slide deck here. There you go.
All right, so folks, tonight I'm going to hopefully demystify what SRE and DevOps are, where they intersect and where they diverge. So I assume that most of you are familiar with Datadog, so I'll keep this brief. Datadog is an observability platform that provides full visibility across your organization. We span end-to-end from your infrastructure and network to your applications and services, all the way to your end users. And this enables everyone, operations, development, security, really anybody in the business, to have a shared understanding of your systems and to immediately identify and resolve problems when they arise. So if you want more information about how Datadog can help your team or sign up for a 14-day free trial, hit up datadoghq.com. But tonight is about us. My goal for our time today is to clear up any confusion about what DevOps and SRE are, tools and practices that will help you on your DevOps journey, the kinds of people that can help you improve your engineering efforts, and suggestions for incorporating SRE practices into your organization. Now, you may be wondering who this bearded beauty is and why he's qualified to talk at me. Hi, I'm Waldo. I used to be a productive member of society before I took this job, but I come from the world of systems and operations engineering. Before accidentally going to the right conference, I was a fairly typical bitter sysadmin type. The DevOps community was still pretty new, but attending Velocity in 2011 was revelatory for me. That week literally changed my career. I'd simply never been in an organization that didn't have a contentious and often even antagonistic relationship between the people who make things and the people who keep them running. Since we're here, I should explain what I mean by DevOps. DevOps, whenever I say it, is a professional and cultural movement that focuses on openness, sharing, and mutual respect. It seeks to improve the quality of life for its adherents, for your company, and for your customers. DevOps also addresses the situation where a lot of effort is spent on the development of features, but the operation of features, making them actually available to your users, has gotten very little investment from the business historically. Availability is the one feature that any application needs, and that's driven by its reliability. But by nature of most organizations, the people who write the features don't figure in reliability because the impact of that reliability isn't felt by them. There's an acronym with a couple of variants that is helpful to describe some of the core tenets of DevOps. Most common one being CAMS. This stands for Culture, Automation, Metrics, and Sharing. Sometimes you'll see COMS or CLAMS with the addition of L for learning. You can argue amongst yourselves about which is right or canonical, but we're talking about mainly CAMS. Culture asks us to be conscious of the culture that we're creating and participating in at work. Automation's focus is to reduce toil and making steps repeatable, less risky, and freeing people up to do more interesting and rewarding work. We care about measurement or metrics so that we can see the impact of our changes and how successful we are. And sharing encourages us to be radically open about our failures as much as our successes. And learning requires a degree of self-awareness, as well as being receptive to feedback, admitting when something doesn't work and changing it. Now, despite the dev and ops in the name, it isn't just about those two roles. DevOps is literally about the entire business, encouraging everyone to be aware of their role in business and that their work is aligned with the business's goals. So there's no need to awkwardly add things to the word DevOps. Adding QA or security or net is unnecessary. They're already included. We've lost the battle that DevOps is not a job title, given how popular the recruiting for that has been. Technically speaking, it's not really any different from what excellent systems or ops engineering has been historically. But there's no such thing as DevOps tools. And if you have a team called DevOps, I'll address that later. I say all of that because it's nearly impossible to describe SRE, which stands for Site Reliability Engineering, without an understanding of DevOps. SRE is a set of practices, and it can be a job description. It could be said that DevOps is an idea, while SRE is an implementation. When the SRE book was published in 2016, many of us were a bit surprised to see that it looked a lot like Google-branded DevOps. Ultimately, SRE is the idea of how Google, in isolation, addresses the problems that the DevOps community was working on elsewhere. I'll describe the skills to look for later, but in short, the people best suited to this are developers with an operations mindset or ops folks with software skills. In order for DevOps and SRE to be most effective, you'll need to consider how your organization is structured. It's almost not a culture talk if I don't bring up Conway's Law, which is an adage that says organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of these organisms. And this immediately makes most people think about their org chart. And they're not wrong, but the key word here is communication. If you have a typical org chart where, say, development and operations are distinct groups, they're likely to have conflict because they have opposing goals. Development is rewarded for rapid change, and operations is rewarded for stability. This is where we need to disambiguate between reporting structures and communication structures. Let's take two hypothetical teams in an e-commerce site that interact with one another. Say one works on the inventory products and the other works on shopping cart functionality. Let's say the management of these two groups don't work well together. Not active fighting, but friction. If the two teams don't have any other interaction outside of their management, then the communication is minimal, and the likelihood of misunderstandings will be high, and it's unlikely that their software will perform well. If, for instance, members of those two teams regularly have lunch together, they're much more likely to have an easier working relationship with each other, and the quality of their software interactions will probably reflect that. Now, it's not great that their management doesn't work together well. The individuals on those teams might not be getting the support and knowledge that they need. But the fact that they do have a communication structure in place does improve the quality of their work and their software, and thus the customer experience. A popular theme in DevOps and SRE is the breaking down of silos. The metaphor usually refers to grain silos, but in some organizations, missile silos may seem more appropriate. A common misstep has been to rename the operations team to DevOps, effectively changing nothing else, and then be disappointed in the results that didn't emerge. Another common misstep is to create a dedicated DevOps team that sits between dev and ops, but in this case, you're usually just creating another silo. So, well done. In my opinion, the organizational paradigm that works best is what's called a product team. You may hear other people argue that it should be called a service team. But in this model, self-contained cross-functional teams are created to solve the business needs that they're tasked with. In addition to the team producing software needed to solve their problems, they also operate it. Now, whether this applies to the build versus buy thing as well. The fact that the team operates its own solutions is a key fact and feature of the product teams. You may have heard, you build it, you run it. This ultimately improves reliability and reduces your recovery times, because the feedback loop between an identified need to deployment is drastic. The identified need to the deployment and the feedback of it is drastically reduced. In other terms, responsibility is aligned with authority and capability. In addition to organizing your employee structure around products, you should also consider having them be seated by product. When teams are developing and operating their own products, they're going to experience a variety of problems. But when they're in close proximity, they'll have a greater breadth of experience and skills to bring to their solutions. Further, by having people of similar skills solving different problems in proximity causes distraction and a less diverse field of insight. I could go on much more about this, but that's a whole nother talk. So when you pursue the product team route like Datadog has, you may feel that the sharing of information around people of similar skill set may be lost. To that end, Datadog has the concepts of squads and guilds, which are subcommunities that cross our product team boundaries. A squad is a short-term group that organizes to solve a single goal, often an OKR, that doesn't fit neatly onto a specific team, or it benefits a large number of teams. Previous examples have included topics such as improving recruiting, analytics, and even organizing our next hackathon. Here we have, if I remember correctly, a 16th century Dutch guild, and a guild owns and shepherds an important part of our architecture or culture that crosses many teams. As you can see, a key feature of guilds are hats. I have not gotten a hat yet. I wouldn't mind one of these hats, even though they're not exactly my style. But guilds are larger, semi-permanent versions of a squad. And previous examples of these are a front-end guild or an on-call guild, which helps usher in, especially new engineers, how to be on call and what they should do, how they should behave. As opposed to a DevOps team, you may actually stand up an SRE team. And this is one way that SRE is distinct from DevOps. You can have, it makes sense to have a specific role or dedicated team called SRE. With that said, there are different ways that this might take form. So a non-definitive list of ways that you could do this. You could have a team of SREs that perform code reviews. They may help out with incident management and facilitate postmortems. You may have an individual SRE or a small group of them who support a dedicated portfolio, or they may be permanently on some product teams. You may also have individuals who rotate among different teams on a periodic basis, per week or per sprint, especially if they're taking the time periodically to do, say, bug hunts, looking for opportunities to improve the reliability specifically. There are a lot of ways that you can slice this. Now, what I'm going to talk about now are sets of tools that you should be pursuing if you don't have them already. And not all of these are software. In fact, most of them are ways of thinking. Upfront, you need to acknowledge that change is hard, will take time, and probably won't work at first. Having a mindset that failure is the first step to success will help you in your transitions. One team that I worked on within the last few years, our team motto was, "We'll suck less tomorrow." While big bang grand reveals can be very satisfying, they're more difficult to get right and harder to diagnose when things go wrong. This is a part of the continual iterative improvement mindset. Getting into the habit of small releases and of showing your work earlier to elicit feedback and run experiments helps keep projects on the rails. Ultimately, it drives towards more satisfactory outcomes. Now, I'm not saying that you need to do test-driven development, but it is a great framework for ensuring that the development has a degree of verifiability before it goes anywhere. Wrapping testing into your integration and merging process removes a lot of potential for faults. More importantly, those tests need to be reliable. Having tests that sometimes fail or need to be run more than once to get them to work, they're brittle and they should be removed or replaced as soon as possible. Much is being said publicly about observability. Observability doesn't replace monitoring. The argument I mainly make towards this is that observability is an adjective. It describes a property of your software, whereas monitoring is the act of watching your events and metrics for problems. And these things aren't mutually exclusive. Additionally, there should be a relationship between the application testing in your CI and your monitoring. You should be testing similar things to make sure that there's a shared sense of what success looks like. They don't need to be a one-to-one relationship from tests to monitors, but you should ensure that success is being measured in similar ways, both in development and at runtime. Who receives pages and alerts when they happen? Has this ever been a decision that was consciously made? Are the people who receive the alert the people who can resolve the issue? And is any effort being made to find and fix repeat incidents? When something goes wrong, what happens? Do you collect the lessons learned? Are remediation items published and prioritized? Do you only do after-action reviews or lessons learned after something goes wrong? The resulting outcome from a postmortem should almost never be someone being fired, with malicious intent being the rare exception. Human error might be a cause, but it's the beginning of the postmortem, not the conclusion. If a human erred, it's important to find out why they thought what they were doing was the right thing to do. Was there a cognitive disconnect between how they thought things worked and how they actually work? If it was something like a typo, is it possible your environment could introduce some tooling interfaces with better guardrails? It's not hard to imagine, but about a year ago, there was an AWS S3 outage where more instances were cycled than was desired because of a typo. Or that time, Hawaii went on high alert when they were supposed to be putting on a nuclear test warning, and it ended up being a real warning erroneously. Guardrails. Now, if you remember your Frank Herbert, fear is the mind killer. For this reason, it's important that your postmortems aren't retributive. For one, people will be loath to admit their mistakes if their job and reputation are on the line. When you have an incident, it's already incurred some cost. If you fire somebody for making a mistake, you'll have derived nothing from the failure and no learning will have happened. You've lost that money and gotten no value. This is one way that you can directly embrace the idea of iterative improvement. Personally, I don't get too excited I haven't gotten very excited about microservices. I consider it to be mainly a doubling down on SOA. I don't think that monoliths or microservices are inherently good or bad. I do prefer that apps are small, do one thing well, or a small number of things well, and are interacted with over web protocols. But I certainly won't be the one to tell you that they're mandatory. That said, SOA does align nicely with the goals of a DevOpsy organization. They make it very easy to align people with products, which align to business goals. When you have a version and documented API for your service, you can innovate responsibly by incrementally releasing new features that change behavior without breaking your existing contracts. With proper monitoring, you can also responsibly target things for deprecation. You can see the numbers, and if you do it right, you can watch as your older instances aren't used anymore, and again, responsibly deprecate. But what's important is that your architecture makes it easy for you to draw team responsibility boundaries, and that it's sane and easy to update and deploy your services. Uptime is a poor measure of reliability. When uptime is the core metric that you evaluate on, it'll drive behaviors that optimize for that metric, such as slowing down innovation because your engineers don't want to make changes. And it's very rare that zero deploys will lead to less downtime. That's almost certainly not the outcome you want. Agile development's fail-fast approach, coupled with distributed applications and dynamic infrastructure, requires us to have a better understanding of reliability. 100% uptime is almost always the wrong metric. It's the wrong amount, the wrong quantity. SLOs help you to understand the true health of your systems and how your end users experience them, as well as leaving you with room to innovate. Without SLOs, you may be measuring the wrong thing by misunderstanding how your customers experience your service. As a result of defining SLOs, your engineers have pre-approved error budgets already defined as room to experiment and innovate. SLOs are a really involved topic, and I've written material elsewhere, but for the time being, I want to defer to another talk on the topic. Jennifer Petoff is one of the editors of the SRE book. A key takeaway is that realization that 100% uptime is impossible, and not all your services need to be run at that level. Keeping that in mind, you can't run a 4.9 service that's dependent on a 3.9 service. So the last point I want to make in here is that you should default to open within the company. Metrics, dashboards, and docs give as many people as practical access to see them. Allow everybody to use the same information to make decisions. This also goes as far as your application or service status endpoints, and you should publish your SLO status widgets. So, incorporating SRE into your organization. I hate to give an it depends, but it depends. Mainly on the talent and personalities that you have access to. Let's assume that you're willing to try different modes and are willing to attempt multiple experiments despite the failures and successes you encounter. By that, I mean, a single experiment isn't going to assure repeatable success or repeatable failure. As much as I'd love to give you a definitive right way, it just doesn't exist. However, these experiences will allow for plenty of topics for papers and conference proposals. Now, some core skills and characteristics of SRE. The people who comprise this field often have an ops head with development skills or developers with operations experience. Being master code reviewers is really helpful. You'll find that they're operationally cynical, whereas a younger developer is going to be used to the database being running on their own machine and there's no latency between their app and the message queue, somebody who's operationally cynical will ask, well, what happens when there's high latency or when it's just down? These are people who their reaction is to solve operational problems with software. They're autodidacts and polymaths, meaning they don't let themselves be boxed in to a certain set of skills and experience, but also don't let themselves be boxed in by their own ignorance and will seek out new knowledge. Every job description in the world, by requirement, has the word communication in it, apparently. But really, SRE is a place where you especially need excellent communication skills because you're going to be talking in fairly quickly. You're going to go between senior engineers and more experienced engineers and database administration and upper management. You have to be able to speak across a wide range of skills and experience. Likewise, they're teachers and mentors. When they sit down to talk to someone, they want to improve things overall. So when they point out that, hey, you're doing this wrong, or you're not considering the scenario of, for instance, that message queue not being there, they're doing it to help people grow and learn. And finally, humility. The best SREs know that they don't know everything and that they haven't experienced anything, and they're willing to be wrong. And that's okay. The bad news is that the set of skills, never mind the additional technical chops that we didn't actually talk about, doesn't exist in a single person. Never mind being able to field a team full of these people. The good news is that knowing that, you can save a lot of time and effort trying to hunt that unicorn. You're going to want to plan to have people of widely divergent experience to support and train one another. So let's talk about some pitfalls. Change is hard. Inertia is going to be difficult to overcome. Change will take time, and the appearance of progress is going to seem very slow. Stating your intended goals, avoiding platitudes, but stating explicitly that you intend to change and that you cannot change by continuing to do the same things. Just as there's no DevOps in a box, you can't just go buy yourself some SRE. I mean, you can try, but it's not going to work out well. Personally, I rage against technical standards, also centers of excellence and other forms of ivory tower. I have a side rant on best practices versus lessons learned or after actions. But in my experience, and this is me, I find that people who want to drive standards they tend towards dogmatism and arguments about following the standard instead of letting individual teams to be autonomous. And this goes back to if the product team is responsible for their own fate, they should live with their decisions. Now, depending on the rules and regulations involved, not all teams will be able to use all of the features of a modern team, or may have to perform things in a specific way in order to be compliant. For example, if your regulatory restrictions don't allow the person to write code, approve, and deploy it, you should have a conversation with your auditor. There are a lot of assumptions about what regulatory restrictions say, what people assume that they say, that are incorrect. Most auditors are happy to engage in a talk about, in the case of develop, approve, and deploy software in an ABC scenario, or sometimes, depending on the regulations, you can do like an ABA instead, where when a piece of software may take the place as one of the humans in as the entity that does the approval or the deployment or whatnot. Tying along with that, don't handcuff the teams that these restrictions don't apply to. Isolate things that involve payment processing or PII and so on from the requirements from the rest. Just if they're not limited by those restrictions, don't limit them. On the topic of matrix orgs, don't. This at least doubles, if not squares, the amount of leadership burden on your ICs. Look at more towards product teams and guilds. What ends up happening when you have a matrix org is that the individual engineer has two chains of leadership that they have to appease, and work's going to come through multiple pipelines and priorities will be juggled, and it's just not what the engineer is there for. Don't do this. Some people might rather depart than change. And some of the people's decisions will surprise you. The change and openness are scary and often isn't the habit of most companies. But openness, especially around failure, is what makes all of this work. Failures and mistakes are learning opportunities. Firing someone who makes a mistake means that you wasted however much that mistake cost. A firing should almost never occur unless it's particularly egregious, intentional, or the person just refuses to learn. Finally, your mileage will vary. Google's solution won't solve your problems. Probably. What makes Google solutions work at Google is dependent on the entire ecosystem that comprises it. That is to say, you won't instantly have Google success by doing what Google says that they do without very careful consideration. Asking, what can I do to achieve this result is more helpful than asking, what did Google do? Google's problems aren't your problems, except in the abstract. Now, I'm not dunking on Google at all. I've got a lot of friends who are there. Yeah, not a lot, but the people that I've met have usually been pretty excellent. That said, not everybody in Google recognizes what's described in the SRE book. I'm not being critical, but you could also say that some of this content in here could be called aspirational. Even at the time of the writing of the book, not all of Google's teams operated in the ways described. And keep in mind that the book was published in 2016. I don't think it would be a very good bet to that things hadn't changed in the 4 years since. So, in our time today, I've attempted to clear up any confusion about what DevOps and SRE are, tools and practices that can help you on your DevOps journey, the kinds of people that can help improve your engineering efforts, and suggestions for incorporating SRE practices into your organization. With that, I want to thank you for your time and attention. I hope that this was helpful, informative, and gives you some ideas of how to improve your own organizations. I want to thank Mike for organizing this and being so awesome and welcoming, and it's just great to see him again, especially in this year of years. And with that, give it back to Mike and open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, Waldo. So let's go ahead and open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions, please go ahead and post them, and I will make this available so Waldo can answer them. So we have plenty of time here. So let's see if we have any questions for Waldo. Let's see here.
Or maybe I just amaze them all with brilliance.
Well, that was one comment made there.
Oh, thanks, Steve.
Let me see. There's another one coming through. Hasn't made it through. One of the questions. Here they go. There's another comment here. We're slowly starting to trickle in.
Thank you, Thomas. I appreciate that.
And I think Thomas has another question here.
So the question is, how many SREs come from traditional dev teams versus ops teams? That, I can't answer that. And in Datadog ourselves, a different version of this talk, we address like some of the backgrounds of people within our SRE organization. We have people who have, I want to say, master's and doctorates degrees. We have people who haven't finished public school, and everything in the middle. I would say the ones that came from became SREs in Datadog or were already there. There's probably more of them who come from a software engineering background than development, but then there are lots of other people like myself who started off in the ops world and start teaching themselves to code kind of by accident. And so being operationally cynical and learning the skills was the path that myself and several others have taken. So I think looking for people who have the teaching mindset and who learn things kind of on their own, especially, are people to keep an eye on, to groom towards that.
So I guess a question to add to Thomas's question here is, does Datadog have a specific team that is comprised of SRE engineers?
We actually use them in a couple different ways. I think we do have a dedicated SRE team, but we also have SREs spread throughout the organization. And we also work on the product team model as well. So people who are writing the features are also responsible for them being operational. So there's a lot that leans into and lends itself well.
Gotcha. Thomas had a follow-up question to that one.
Yeah, let's see. From Thomas, it seems like ongoing training never ends. That is absolutely true.
That is true.
With Kubernetes, Docker, 3 major clouds, how do you recommend some in IT leadership develop their teams? That is a good question. Giving people space to experiment, obviously your operational concern and the business concerns come first. But if you have room to experiment, or if you don't have one, fight for a training budget to improve your engineers, regardless of the adjective, whether software engineers or database or operations or whatever. Encouraging your people with training, or maybe periodic rewards where you have like an engineer of the quarter, and the bonus is maybe some money towards a subscription to like one of the learning platforms, or I don't know if O'Reilly's Safari is still a thing.
Yes.
Giving people the opportunity to try something new, even if it doesn't go anywhere. Say, okay, you can take a week and do a deep dive into Kubernetes if that's new to you, and have people really try to experiment with them, and then bring it back to the rest of the team and say, here was my experience with it. These are the things that it might work well for. These are things that it might not work well for. Giving people the opportunity to go off into a corner and play around, and then come back and share that experience with the rest of the team. It doesn't need to lead to anything except a presentation and people learning something. It also gives them an opportunity to practice their public speaking skills, just sharing it. And whether it's you give them a dedicated meeting or a lunch and learn or something like that.
I'm going to offer Thomas another thing I wasn't really going to bring up now, but now that he brought this up, about the continuous learning, on September 9, we're going to have a meetup with the two gentlemen that wrote the book on creating your own dojo. So dojos is another way, to implement some of this continuous learning and things of that nature. So Thomas, come back September 9th.
I'm going to make that note myself because I hadn't seen this. So
yeah, they wrote this book about creating dojos, and it kind of goes into a lot of this continuous learning. They started it off first with the he says he run his comment there. I run the dojo since the last Thursday. Yeah, good, awesome,
nice.
Yeah, but they wrote the book on creating your own dojo, and they have a lot of wisdom about how to go about setting it up, what kind of people you should bring through, the length of time, and what type of people to bring into the dojo. Mm-hmm. They started it off with creating DevOps Dojo, and then that led into writing the book of creating your own dojo.
Very good. Yeah. Another thing that you could do to encourage learning among your teams is letting people do
like an exchange product groups.
Yeah, embed in other teams, whether it's another product team, whether they're in the same role or a different role, and spend whatever can be afforded, whether it's like a week or a sprint or a month or a quarter. That's a really good way to, one, improve those communication structures, but also to develop some of those skills and let people know what they don't know. It's a really sharp way to show people what they don't know and the complexities involved in somebody else's work.
Exactly. So we get another question there.
Yeah, from Steve. Any suggestions for things to suggest to leadership how to transition from a hierarchical or matrix to a product-oriented organizational structure?
That's a good question too.
Yeah, that is. So this is difficult to do, but can yield real benefits. I first of all get rid of the matrix org. Like I said, the leadership burden of the individual contributors is, in my experience, not good. It just gives people twice as many people that they have to report to and keep happy, and it's even worse if their priorities don't align or they have different opinions on how things should be done. It's not helpful. Now, if you're doing a matrix and it is like on a product versus functional axes, encouraging the leadership to, it's really hard to do without a direct ear to some of them, or being able to, it's a hard topic to broach, especially because they probably came up in a hierarchical structure. The matrix structure probably sounded like an interesting overlay, but convincing them to get rid of the structure that put them in place is going to be difficult. But asking them to describe their company in terms of their investment in their individual products might be a way to do that. I think other talks or articles I've written, a product-oriented organization structure is a really good way to see where the company is investing its people. What are the products that it cares about? What is it actively developing? What's on life support? And what's not really being used and maybe should be deprecated or folded into something else. When you're organized by function, it's a lot less apparent how things are being invested in. And again, this I'm a big fan of, you build it, you run it. So it's a good way of showing where the investment is. De-inspire. I like that word. I haven't seen it too many places, but where I have is not been pretty. So, and it really only takes one person in significantly high leadership to really tip the boat on that.
So I got another one here from Thomas.
Let's see, from Thomas. Ideas to work directly with your business partners and ask them if they want more value faster. That, yeah. Yeah. So the problem, not only with the executive leadership, but I would say even more from the middle leadership, is the functional leaderships, your ops manager, your engineering director, convincing them to decide what they want to do. Do they want to manage communities within the company, like the functional communities? Do they want to grow people, which are, those two things are related, or do they want to build product? And I think that building the people and managing product are two different things that are equally viable pathways, but it's I think that's one way to get people on board, is if you can do it from the bottom up and get that functional leadership to decide, you know what, I don't care as much about product, or I really want to develop people in communities. If you can get them to start thinking in that terms, that might bubble its way to the top as well. You may be able to encourage change that way. M. Benji. Thank you. Who is on a product team? Should engineers be on this team? Would it be alarming to you if a prospective employer had no engineers on the team that had ever touched the actual product code? Yes, it would be alarming. So the people that you need on the product team are the people they contain the skills needed to bring a solution to bear. Now, and it depends entirely on your people. I have a whole side rant on job titles should be considered harmful because they tend to pigeonhole people. If an engineer thinks of themselves as an ops engineer and they don't think that they should look at the repo and fix a problem that's causing problems, that's not helpful. Oh, you're a QA engineer. Well, go over there and write me some tests. Yeah. That's not great. So the people on the product team have the skills needed to understand the business problem being set before them and to bring solutions to bear and to keep that solution available. And this could be a build versus buy thing too. If you don't need to build something, let's say PagerDuty. Like if you need a pager rotation and you're not going to write your own PagerDuty. They've done it way better than anybody else has. There's no, that's a solved problem that you can solve with relatively little money. But you still probably want somebody in charge of that relationship with the company who gets to know the APIs, you have a team that, and this probably isn't this isn't their product. It's probably one of a portfolio of products that belong in that product team. And they probably will have a mix of built versus bought software. So this is something that a team is assigned to take care of, and that's just part of their portfolio. So in that case, no engineer actually wrote any of the PagerDuty stuff, but they don't necessarily need to. If you have a product that is still needed but isn't actively developed, and I'm going to heavily caveat that and come back to it in a second. If that software product is stable, doesn't need much in the way of features, and really just needs to be maintained and kept alive, that's okay if you don't have anybody who actually wrote it originally. The caveat is that software still needs to be updated from a security aspect. It needs to be kept up to date on modern operating system, the modern runtime or whatnot. So there should be someone in there at least monthly or quarterly updating that software. So it should never get so stale that it becomes really difficult to do. And if you have just two ops engineers who are taking care of this and maybe a couple other things, but they're competent to make all the changes needed, and even like when there's a major revision for its environment, that they themselves are competent to make those changes. Maybe the Java 8 to 9, there are enough paradigms changes that they're maybe. Here's the other thing: a team can change. So if you need to pull in somebody to help make those changes, it could be a temporary thing, like an internal contractor, or maybe you have somebody come in and, especially an SRE, come in and look for faults in the application to see where some of those software assumptions may be. That may be something else you're looking for. What was that, Mike?
Like a risk assessment.
Yeah, thank you. Perfect wording. But yeah, it's not necessarily a red flag that that you don't have a software engineers on the team. It is a red flag if that software hasn't been updated in, let's be really generous and say 3 months.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see if we have any more questions out there. I don't see anything right now. Here's a comment from Steve. I don't see any more. Anybody else has any more questions here that want to pop up? Any burning desires in your mind?
Mine? No,
I'm there. Everybody else's on what they think SRE is or DevOps is, and
I mean, I often get, how do I grow a beard like that? And step one is don't shave.
One thing you mentioned when you were mentioning the cams and the clams and the comms, and I never heard anybody use the L for learning. I have heard it used for lean.
Yeah. So Daniel Frosty, he's on the core team with you. He had mentioned that too, but I'd never seen lean put there either. So
and I think the person that really brought up lean was just Humble.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think I would have heard learning probably from Schaefer. So
okay.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Steve. Have a great dinner. Thanks for coming.
Let's see if we have anybody else come up on board there. There's another comment from M. Benji.
Thanks, Benji. I appreciate it.
Let's see how anybody else has any comments. Anybody else want to share how you're doing DevOps in your organization and what you think you can improve on? I mean, those are good questions to always find out from the audience.
Yeah.
Let's see if anybody wants to share. Yeah, sometimes in this type of platform that we're using to do the meetups, it's great. It's not like, how can I say, it's not like Zoom that people can Zoom bomb you, but you could get people that post things, they're typing things out and you don't want them to see, but it only gets shared so much. But I'm waiting to see if anybody else has any more questions. If not, then we'll just call it a night because we're getting close to the hour.
Yeah, if anybody has questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, or I didn't put up my email is waldo@datadoghq.com.
Are you going to provide the slide deck on SlideShare or?
Sure, I can.
Like that. That way we could share it out on the meetup.
Yeah. I'll just send it to you, Mike, so you can put it in the meetup.
Okay, yeah, and or I could post it up on SlideShare and then put the link on Meetup.
Okay. Yeah, if you're going to do that, I'll send you a link to the SlideShare.
Okay, sounds good. And then I'll just post that link on Meetup and people can access it from there.
Sounds good.
I guess everybody else has dropped. Hold a second. What is Tom saying? No more questions. I have no more questions. Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Yeah, Tom is a great guy. He has a lot of videos as well that he posts on LinkedIn and stuff.
Okay.
A lot of quick videos and stuff. So, you can follow him as well.
Yeah.
Definitely. Okay, well, I think we're going to call it a night. And then I don't remember. I know in one of the meetups coming up soon, we're going to have 3 ladies from Brazil that are cybersecurity women. They're going to be talking about cybersecurity, how they're doing it in Brazil to engage women in the community and young girls to get into doing cybersecurity coding and stuff over there. So it's going to be an interesting meetup. So
is that next month?
No, it's going to be, yes. It's going to be, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's the next one coming up in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good.
Three ladies from Brazil.
I'll be sure to be there.
Okay. We'll talk to you later. Take care, everyone. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on.